Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
This is Charlie Menzies. I'm the lead creative at Parable Games and the designer for Shiver RPG.
And today we're going to look at Parable Games' newest crowdfunding project, Shiver Double Feature. Tell me about this. This is, I believe, the third crowdfunding project that the company's been working on.
It is indeed, yes. So we had our first crowdfunding campaign was for the core system of Shiver, and then we've done a subsequent one that's funded and has just had the digital book release for Shiver Gothic. And now we're on our third release, which is Shiver Double Feature, which is exploring not one but two different subgenres in the horror genre. So the way that it breaks down is we've got Shiver Blockbuster on one side of kind of the horror spectrum, and we've got Shiver Slasher on the other end. And we really wanted to explore both areas for kind of horror fans of different types, of different intensities with this project.
Are the books going to be both as big as the original books? What are the technical details of each book exactly?
So we're aiming for the kind of core expansion books for Slasher and Blockbuster to be around the same length as the Shiver core rulebook, if not maybe a little bit larger. Some of the stories that we're kind of having drafts in now, when we're kind of going through editing them, they are quite chunky. So we're actually thinking that the books might be a little bit larger than the core book, but we'll kind of have to see. But in terms of what they'll be, so you've got the two hardcover books, one for Blockbuster and one for Slasher. And we also are doing starter sets as well. Both, again, not one, but two. One themed on Blockbuster, one themed on Slasher, to provide something kind of on the market for people to try and get into Shiver really, really easily. Just pick up a box. It's got everything in there that you need to play, and you can get going straight away. In terms of the books, the new mechanical elements that they're kind of introducing. So on the Blockbuster side, Blockbuster is all about telling tales of what we've called the in-house thing that we've termed for it is Spielbergian peril, is what I've put on it. And kind of in the writers' room with me and Adam, who's the kind of story writer for these two books, with me kind of doing the mechanical side and editing. We had a thing kind of when we've been knocking around ideas for this of that if you're playing a Blockbuster game in Shiver, it's not going to go beyond 12A, or I think in America it's a PG-13, isn't it? I'm thinking for America for film classification.
Yes.
Trying to think of kind of how to term it, but yes, so kind of not too extreme on the blood and gore, not too scary, but enough threat, enough tension there, and enough horror elements that it's still kind of give you a bit of a chill, but ultimately not scare you to death. So example that I use is when I was a kid, me and my brother were massive fans of Jurassic Park, for example, and we were both terrified of the velociraptors. They were some of the best kind of like movie antagonists, especially in terms of just kind of that horror element that's there. And a lot of people say Jurassic Park's not a horror film, but I think if you go back and watch that scene in the kitchen, I would argue that it is. Is the thing. So with Blockbuster, it's Legends of the Silver Scream is the name of the book, and a mechanical element there that we're adding in is called Road to Stardom. So the idea is that to kind of help take the edge off the horror a little bit more for kind of newer players or those who are new to the horror genre, you're actually playing kind of a meta game within what you're already doing. So instead of playing as a character in a horror situation, you're actually playing an actor in a Blockbuster movie that has horror elements. So you can play as a character, that character may die, but then your actor lives on, and that actor then takes on a new role in the next movie. And in the interim, you gain awards, whether that's an Oscar or a Razzie. That's going to affect your performance and how you develop your career as you move forward, because you can start out being the leading man, potentially give a bad performance, and then you're suddenly the side character. Or maybe you do a kind of Bob Odenkirk turn and you're like the comedic actor who then does the action hero turn, for example. So we kind of have all like kind of great little mechanical juicy bits for doing that, and kind of encouraging long-term play and building on those elements of people who love doing sequels. and want to build their own movie franchise, you can be a returning actor as well as a returning character in different movies as well as sequels to your own movies. So that's kind of the Road to Stardom in a nutshell for Legends of Still Scream. And then on the other side, we've got Shiver Slasher, where the book is called Generation Murder. So very much like the Road to Stardom, it's another mechanical element that encourages long form play and gives you a way to interconnect stories. So with this, it's you play as a character, and we know slasher films notoriously deadly. Your character might die. So what this provides is a new way to kind of carry on playing or carry on that character's legacy by creating an inheritance that you then pass to another character, your descendant, whether that's your own family, your chosen family, whoever you choose is kind of next in line to receive some certain boons, but also some negatives that they've inherited from being stalked by these horrible killers across multiple decades. And that's kind of the crux of the mechanics that then interlink with multiple stories that are go from, we've got a prequel story in the 1930s, and then it kicks off kind of again in the 1950s, and we kind of go roughly decade by decade exploring the slasher genre across a kind of a near century long story that's all interconnected. And so potentially you could be playing as a kid or a teenager in the 1950s. And if you're good at surviving, you might get to 2020 and be an octogenarian fighting off Jason Voorhees with your Zimmer frame, is the aim, which is desperately what I want to do. I really want my characters to survive until I'm 80 and fight some slashers. And that's the two books, kind of in a nutshell.
So it sounds like these aren't just setting books. This will sound like there's adventures tied to it that you can play along with it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. So in each book, this is about a parity across both. There's 6 new unique ventures in each one, with then the mechanical underpinning that we've just kind of been talking about with the Road to Stardom and the inheritance system that then allow you to connect those together. But you can take out that mechanical element and plug that into any game that you want to do. So, like, say you want to play a group of like a medieval family, Game of Thrones style, that's haunted by ghosts and keeps dying. For example, you could take the inheritance system, and all of a sudden you have a haunted family tree that you can start playing around with and use that system to carve multi-generational horror tales, for example. And with Road to Stardom, any movie that you can think of that's kind of got a bit of blockbuster action in it, and kind of some elements of horror, you can start kind of carving out your acting career on the tabletop.
Or does each book have new rules specifically for these settings? Or are they standalone from the core rule book? Do you need the core rule book to play with the double feature books?
So yeah, so you'd need the core rule book for the base rule set of Shiver. So that's in terms of kind of any expansion books that we do now. They you need the core rule book as your base for kind of just the base mechanics and playing the game. What these books do is they expand certain elements of mechanics and provide more story content. Is the main thing. So we've kind of talked about the overarching kind of like story mechanics that we're adding in. But in terms of each individual one, so for Blockbuster, we're looking at how we do chase scenes, how we do action scenes, stunts, those kind of things. That there's going to be kind of mechanical elements for running those sequences that are kind of a bit more high octane, and kind of giving you that feeling of cinematic action on your tabletop. And for Slasher, we're providing a lot of guidance on how to build your own slasher. We kind of did quite a bit already on building your own enemies in the Shiver core rulebook, but this is kind of more particular by talking about slasher tropes, different styles of slasher from different eras. Are they kind of a unkillable walking tank, or do they kind of come and harry the players, smoke bomb, and then disappear? There are certain types of slashers that appear in media in different ways, and we're kind of writing up a guide that will show players kind of what they are, how they can design their own, and kind of add various other kind of unique elements into it. And on top of that, each slasher that's designed in the book has its own unique react table for each of the 6 stories. So you've got 6 very uniquely powerful enemies to have a play around with and plug into your own stories as well.
So let's talk about the crowdfunding project as
Mhm.
is. I noticed it's been moved from Kickstarter to GameFound.
Mhm.
What can you tell us about? I guess would there be any changes from the style of crowdfunding have you done before? Now that you've moved, or will there still be stretch goals, for example, and things like that?
Mm. There'll still be stretch goals. That's something we're committed to. Is the more kind of support that we get, we want to kind of be providing as much stuff for our players as possible. In terms of kind of the new things that GameFound offers as a platform in comparison to Kickstarter, so we actually, for those who are familiar with the first Kickstarter for the core book, we used GameFound as our pledge manager, and we had a really good experience, kind of going through them and using them, and then we experimented with BackerKit for the second Kickstarter, and we've kind of landed on actually GameFound now kind of launching its crowdfunding and the way that it handles its kind of backend as well. We really liked that. We thought that it was a really good fit. One of the unique things that GameFound does that I really like, and we've answered quite a few questions about this online, I'm noticing, so I think we could say here, is like we'll be putting we put bundles together very much like pledge tiers on Kickstarter that provide a certain level of discount. But if you're a returning player and you just want to buy, say, the slasher book, for example, you don't have to do the kind of £1 pledge, wait for the pledge manager, forget about it, hurriedly buy it at the end. You can actually from the start go in, look at all the products that are available through the project are listed like individually. You can look at each one individually, you can buy each one individually, and assemble what you want to get out of the project, what you want to kind of get out of the crowdfund from the get-go, which I think is an amazingly powerful tool. And I think um, it's really good for people kind of crowdfunding like us who have now an established game, an established audience, who want to be able to pull and pick bits that are right for them, because not every player we're kind of very aware that not every player may want the slasher stuff. They may only want the blockbuster stuff, or vice versa. So GameFound offers that flexibility, we're finding.
Hmm. Oh, that's wonderful.
Mm.
So I'm looking at the some of the art so far, and it looks very similar to from your previous books. But I don't want to assume. Has anything changed from the art direction with the new books?
So our lead artist is still Ben Alexander, still churning out incredible amounts of art at a incredible standard. It blows us away every single time. In terms of what we're changing up for the art this time, it's still kind of in the core Shiver style, in Ben's style, which is amazing. But there's a couple of little changes that we're making for each book, for each kind of subgenre. So for Blockbuster, when we kind of sat down and started talking about the art style, the saturation's a little bit brighter, everything's a little bit more colorful, a little bit more hopeful. Yeah, a little bit, you're kind of looking at these images and you kind of feel more like the heroes are going to win. Is the kind of the way I framed it when we were talking about it. So kind of feeling a lot more like emulating the movies, kind of the kind of blockbuster tone. On the slasher side, because we're doing a generational story across kind of like all the way from the 30s to 2020, we wanted to have a chat about how we could look at the artwork and make it represent the medium, the film medium that it was shot on at that time, to kind of really lean into that cinematic aspect. So our 1930s stories, like, it's all sepia tone with little film scratches that have been hand drawn in by Ben, and it kind of feels almost like you're watching a lost film reel when you're kind of looking at artwork for that period. But then for the 50s, it's like the birth of dodgy color television, so you have those rolling scan lines. In the 90s, it's digital VHS distortion, and in the 70s and 80s, you kind of have film grain and a little bit of RGB separation from when you had damaged film prints kind of being put together. So it kind of really kind of focusing on it's Ben's style at its core, but playing around with kind of how it's presented to represent the subgenre in the best way possible. And in for slasher, that was really focusing on the medium of the time and really leaning into that cinema element.
Hmm. Before we talked a little bit about ratings.
Mm.
For these books, for anyone that's maybe who has maybe never heard of Shiver before, would you say that that these are, you know, family friendly? Would you say that these are for maybe 18 and higher age range?
Mhm.
What for anyone that's hearing about this for the first time, what would you say about the level of
Mm.
content?
Yeah. So this is again like one of the reasons why we've done the split of that. We're very aware that kind of not every parent wants their kids kind of playing like a kind of deep and gory kind of
Mm,
horror game. And looking at Shiver Blockbuster, it's kind of looking at the films that me and my brother enjoyed when we were kids that our mum showed us, that can be kind of safely enjoyed, and bringing those to the tabletop for kind of kids who really want to get into the hobby. So Blockbuster really lands more on that family friendly side. There's still that Spielbergian threat and kind of peril. So for example, the starter adventure, so somebody was to pick that up, that's called Welcome to Hollow World, where it is a mad billionaire has hollowed out a chunk of the earth and has created a prehistoric park full of kind of extinct like dinosaurs, insects, and creatures, for their own means, and your tour goes off the rails. So it's very much evoking kind of Jurassic Park, and those kind of like Spielberg movies. So if you have kids who are fans of that, then then that element of action, kind of more, and kind of lessening the horror slightly, is going to be kind of really up their alley. Um, so I'd say definitely, but we for kind of, it would be family friendly, but for anyone kind of worried about that, or any kind of gore kind of content that still is in there, we do put in notes, and it's something I did in the core rulebook and the Curse library as well. Just kind of putting notes about how you can take those stories and edit them for younger players who aren't as kind of like into the horror genre, or if there's anything in there that may kind of be kind of in breach of like kind of safety for your players. It's something that they may uh, that may be kind of triggering for them in a negative way. Then we're going to be making sure to kind of include those safety tools as well. So no matter kind of like the age of your player, or the kind of the kind of taste of your player, you can gear it to them really really well. Slasher, I would say, on the other hand, is definitely more in the kind of 16, 18 plus range, is what I would say. It's very much, um, it's one of those kind of subgenres that I think is just notoriously kind of not easy to sanitize, and in a way I wouldn't want to, because it is very much kind of there on the horror die-hard element kind of of the spectrum. I quite often have said quite a lot of interviews, and I think I've mentioned in one of the books, is that horror as a genre is a broad church. There's so many subgenres, but slasher is so large, they are basically Catholicism. It's a big part of the horror community, so we really wanted to do it justice, and we didn't really want to take the teeth out of it. I think there definitely is ways that you could bring the age rating of those down. But just a kind of forewarning on that slasher is definitely geared more for older players, I would
mm.
say, and kind of our die-hard horror fans out there as well.
Oh, okay, okay. So now that these books are coming out, was there anything that you always wanted to play that now that you created a rule system for it, now you're able to run a game like that? I know you mentioned a little bit about Jurassic Park. Was that something you were thinking
Mm.
of?
Yes, so there were two, and actually it's kind of where the split came from. Of I really wanted to play Jurassic Park, and kind of we were taught for ages and ages about kind of what is that? Where does it land? Do we do a book that's just dinosaurs? Do we do prehistoric stuff maybe? But then we landed on, actually there's such a broad range of stuff we could do with the system, and there's so many blockbuster movies like this we can enjoy. That's kind of where Blockbuster came from. But yes, the core element of it came from, I wanted to run around a park and try not to get eaten by dinosaurs. That was definitely where that came from. And on the other side, some of my favorite horror movies are slashers. One of my favorites, I'm a huge John Carpenter fan, and I love Halloween. I
Mm,
love Michael Myers as just this unstoppable force who is like, is it a man? What's his motivation? And he is just this pure, unstoppable force of evil. And I kind of wanted to explore that, like as a player, because I just thought that would be kind of fun and very terrifying to kind of get on the tabletop. But from a mechanical perspective, for me as a designer, slashers are very, very interesting because more often than not, they present themselves as a singular enemy within an entire story, and there's nothing else. So it's kind of like, how do you approach that? How do you make them more powerful? How do you make them more hardy? How do you have them have encounters with the players and disappear again and come back and have this ebb and flow that a kind of slasher movie has, all driving towards that kind of that final fight, that final encounter.
Hmm.
So there was definitely a design curiosity around slashers, which we'd looked at in the core rule book, but I felt there was more and wanted to do more with. And that's something that we're exploring for that book.
Oh, that's great. That's great. It's been sort of one of my game master dreams to go to Cape Cod in Massachusetts and run a game of Jaws. But uh,
Yes.
but I couldn't find the right. I wasn't sure what rules to use, but this sounds right up my alley. That'd be perfect for it.
One of the stories in Blockbuster, I will say now, will make you very pleased if you want to run Jaws. That is what I
Oh,
will say. It's
oh,
there is a there perhaps may be a giant shark kicking around in the Blockbuster book.
oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Is there anything more about either the crowdfunding project or about the books themselves that I haven't asked you about that you wanted to share?
Oh, let me have a think. Talking about the starter sets. Um, so just to kind of clarify on the starter sets a little bit more, kind of like what's actually in them. So each one has an original adventure. It also has dice, pre-made character sheets, a condensed version of the rule book as well is something that we're going to be providing in there. So everything you need from the player side, especially, as well as some kind of director's tips to get playing. So if you want to dip your toes into Shiver, the starter boxes are going to be a really, really good kind of place to start. And then if that's your cup of tea, then I'd suggest the core rule book is kind of almost the next kind of step. So it's a way to kind of like get your feet wet without kind of committing to reading a huge, massive kind of rule book.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So, anyone that wants to know about the older games, if they're available, they're available right now through Parable Games website and Drive Through RPG. Am I correct about that?
Yes, so they're available through our web store at www.parablegames.co.uk. We've just released the first Shiver Gothic book digitally, and we'll be releasing the second one relatively soon, with physical releases coming in the new year as well. So that will all be released on our store. And yes, you can find us on Drive Through RPG. And if you're listening during kind of this year's Halloween, we're featured in the creature feature sale on Drive for RPG. So if you want to snag up some Shiver stuff, we're all over Drive for RPG as well.
And Shiver Double Feature will be on Game Found this
Mm.
October 2022.
Yes. So yeah, the Game Found is going to be going live at on October 11th. So very, very soon. Yes, check it out on GameFound. If you're wanting to kind of find us or follow us or keep up to date with what's happening with the campaign, we're on social media as well. So you can find us on Facebook at Shiver RPG, on Instagram at Shiver RPG, and on Twitter, the one that's a little bit different, which is at Games Parable. So you can find us at Games Parable. And yeah, so there's links everywhere. So if you're struggling to find Game Found or kind of where it is on Game Found, then we have direct links on all of our social media that will take you straight to the project.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your latest project. And to our viewers out there, stay safe. Have a happy Halloween. We'll see you soon.